Karoline Leavitt gives up first-class seat for a veteran. Then the unbelievable happens. The moment Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the plane, a wave of relief washed over her. It had been a grueling day filled with briefings, press calls, and the constant buzz of Washington, D.C. politics. As the youngest White House press secretary, she was in the trenches daily, navigating the relentless media landscape. But now, she was heading home, a short flight to Manchester, New Hampshire, where, for a few days, she could simply be Karoline, the small-town girl who once scooped ice cream at her family's shop. Adjusting the strap of her carry-on, she made her way down the aisle. The familiar scent of fresh coffee mingled with the sterile tang of airplane upholstery. The flight was packed, passengers already settling in, flipping through magazines, adjusting armrests, scrolling through their phones. For Karoline, first class wasn't about luxury. It was about practicality. With constant travel as part of the White House team, a little extra space and quiet was a rare reprieve. She reached her row, placed her bag under the seat, and exhaled until she saw him. An elderly man, likely in his late 80s, walked slowly down the aisle, steady yet deliberate in his movements. His frail frame was wrapped in a well-worn jacket, and perched atop his head was a cap that read, World War II veteran, not a souvenir, but a quiet symbol of sacrifice. Carolina watched as he navigated the narrow space, gripping each seat for support. Around him, most passengers were preoccupied, staring at their screens, impatiently waiting for the flight to take off. But she saw something else. Exhaustion. Not just physical fatigue, but the kind that comes from carrying a lifetime's worth of burdens. The flight attendant directed him toward seat 26B, deep in economy in a cramped middle row. Karoline glanced at the tight space, the long journey ahead. Something about it didn't sit right. She stood. "Sir," she said, stepping into the aisle. The old man looked up, slightly startled. His eyes, clouded with age yet sharp with wisdom, met hers. "Yes?" A brief hesitation. Then she gestured toward her seat. "I'd be honored if you took my spot up here." A silence stretched between them. The veteran blinked, surprised. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." "Please," she insisted, her voice gentle but firm. "You've already done so much for this country. Let me do this for you." The flight attendant, overhearing, stepped in. "That's very kind of you, Miss Leavitt." A quiet murmur spread through the cabin. Passengers took notice. A businessman, 2 rows back, looked up from his emails. A young woman pulled off her headphones. A middle-aged couple exchanged knowing glances. The veteran chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, if you insist, but only if you let me buy you a coffee when we land." Karoline smiled. "Deal." As the flight attendant helped the man into her first-class seat, she gathered her bag and made her way toward 26B. The moment she settled, between 2 passengers, she felt the weight of eyes on her. She hadn't done it for attention. She hadn't done it for recognition. It just felt right. What she didn't know was that this simple act of kindness was about to set something extraordinary in motion. And before the flight even landed, something unbelievable was about to happen. Just as she adjusted to her new seat, the man beside her, a middle-aged passenger in a wrinkled button-down, leaned in slightly, his voice low. "You know who that is, right?" She turned to him, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" He nodded toward first class, where the veteran was settling in. His hands, knotted with age, gripping the armrest as if they carried more than just the weight of his body. "That guy," the man murmured. "He's not just any veteran, that's Joseph Monroe." The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it made her stomach tighten. "I don't—" "Who is he?" she asked. The man let out a quiet laugh. "Of course you wouldn't know. They don't talk about guys like him much anymore." Karoline frowned. There was something about the way he said guys like him, not malicious but weighted with something she didn't yet understand. "He was with the 82nd Airborne in World War II, the man continued. Paratrooper. But after the war, let's just say he got caught up in things." A prickle of unease ran down her spine. And at that moment, Karoline Leavitt realized this flight, this day, This decision was about to change everything. A chill crept along the back of Karoline's neck. "What kind of things?" she asked. The man's eyes flicked around, scanning the cabin as if making sure no one was listening. Then he leaned in. "CIA Black Ops," he murmured. "The kind of missions that don't officially exist." Karoline's pulse quickened. Then back in the 70s, he disappeared, just vanished. The man paused, lowering his voice even further. "Some say he was involved in something big, something the government wanted buried." Her instinct was to brush it off as another conspiracy theory. She'd spent enough time in Washington to recognize how easily half-truths twisted into dramatic stories. But there was something about this man's tone, the absolute certainty in it, that gave her pause. And then, as if on cue, Joseph Monroe turned his head and looked straight at her. She felt it before she saw it, that subtle, heavy awareness of being watched. His gaze wasn't unkind, but it was piercing, calculating, studying her as if he knew exactly what she was hearing. Then, ever so slightly, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Not of gratitude, not of acknowledgement, something else. Karoline swallowed hard. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. At first, it was subtle, a few lingering glances, a hushed whisper. Then, the flight attendant returned, offering Monroe a drink with a warm smile. But just before she turned away, her eyes lingered on Karoline for a second too long. And then there was the man in 24A. He was 2 rows ahead, but she noticed when he twisted slightly in his seat, not to check his phone or adjust his tray table, but to glance back toward first class, toward Monroe. Unlike the others, he wasn't chatting with a seatmate or scrolling absent-mindedly. He was watching, focused, too focused. Karoline's stomach tightened. Was this paranoia? Was she over-analyzing a harmless situation? The overhead. Speakers crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain." She exhaled, trying to push the unease aside. Holding patterns weren't unusual. She had taken enough flights to know that. "We're experiencing an unexpected systems check from air traffic control. Nothing to be concerned about, but we'll be in a holding pattern for the next 20 minutes. 20 minutes? A flicker of doubt returned. The man beside her let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Yeah, that's not normal." Karoline turned to him. "What do you mean?" He nodded toward the window. "Mid-flight, no turbulence, no airspace congestion. A systems check at this altitude?" He exhaled through his nose. "That's just vague enough to mean nothing. And everything." Her jaw tightened. Maybe she was overthinking things. Maybe it was all just a strange coincidence. And then, from first class, Joseph Monroe turned his head again. This time he locked eyes with her. Intentionally. Karoline unbuckled her seatbelt. The man beside her frowned. "Where are you going?" She didn't hesitate. To get some answers. Ignoring the glances from nearby passengers, she walked carefully up the aisle, her heartbeat picking up with each step. Monroe saw her coming and, without hesitation, gestured for her to take the empty seat beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he let out a slow breath and said, "You didn't have to give up your seat for me." Karoline shook her head. It was the right thing to do. Monroe studied her, and up close she could see the deep lines on his face, not just from age, but from a lifetime of carrying burdens. Then, in a quiet, measured voice, he asked, "You have no idea what you just walked into, do you?" Her throat tightened. "What does that mean?" Monroe glanced around, making sure no one was in earshot. Then, in a voice so low she had to lean in to hear, he said, "They're watching me." Her pulse jumped. "Who?" He exhaled slowly. "People who don't like old secrets resurfacing." Karoline swallowed hard. "And you think this flight delay has something to do with you?" Monroe didn't blink. "I know it does." A heavy silence settled between them. She wasn't just sitting next to an old war hero. She had just stepped into something much, much bigger. Monroe's jaw tightened. "Because I didn't just fight in the war." His voice was low, weighted. "I fought after it. And the things I did, The things I know. Some people would rather stay buried. A prickle of unease slid down Karoline's spine. Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the conversation. Miss Leavitt. She turned. It was him. The man from 24A. He stood just a few feet away, his expression unreadable. I need you to come with me. Karoline barely had time to process before Monroe's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. His fingers, strong despite his age, wrapped around her with surprising force. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto hers. Don't go with him. His voice was barely a whisper, her stomach twisted. The man from 24A waited, unmoving. His posture was rigid, his face carefully blank. He wasn't a flight attendant. No uniform, no airline badge. He looked official, but official in a way she couldn't quite place. Miss Leavitt, he repeated, his tone calm but firm. I need you to come with me. The entire first-class cabin was watching now. A flight attendant near the galley hesitated before stepping forward. Sir, I need to ask why you're... The man barely acknowledged her. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a badge. Not TSA, not airport security, Federal Aviation Administration. This is a matter of security, he said. His eyes flicked to Monroe for just a fraction of a second before returning to Karoline. Come with me, please. Her breath caught. Faye, what the hell did the FAA need with her? She looked down at Monroe. His grip hadn't loosened. His face darkened. They're not FAA, he whispered. I've seen this before. They want something. Her pulse pounded. She didn't know what to believe, but every instinct screamed that something was wrong. She needed to play along, at least until she understood what was happening. Slowly, carefully, she pried Monroe's fingers from her wrist and stood. The flight attendant still looked uneasy, but she stepped back as Karoline followed the man toward the front of the plane. Every passenger was watching now. Some whispered. Others just stared wide-eyed. As they passed through the curtain separating first class from the cockpit area, another man was waiting near the flight attendant's jump seat. He looked just like the first one. Dark suit, controlled posture, unreadable expression. Karoline Leavitt. The second man scanned her face. Do you have any knowledge of an individual on this flight named Joseph Monroe? Her pulse spiked. The first man cut in. We believe he is in possession of classified material. She stiffened. Classified? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Something that could compromise national security. The cabin felt suddenly too small. What? She breathed. The second man's voice dropped lower. Miss Leavitt, we need you to remain calm. We believe he boarded this flight with documents that were never meant to see the light of day. She barely processed the words. Then why are you talking to me? The first man held her gaze. Because he trusts you. Her stomach twisted. They weren't wrong. Monroe had barely spoken to anyone else. He had chosen her. Locked eyes with her, pulled her into his confidence. And now these men, whoever they really were, wanted her help. I don't know anything, she said carefully. I gave him my seat, that's it. The second man studied her, as if weighing her words. Then, the plane jolted, not a bump, not a slight shift, a hard, shuddering drop. For a moment, all three of them swayed. The first man's radio crackled. A muffled voice, urgent. His posture changed instantly. He stiffened, pressing a hand to his earpiece. The color drained from his face. The second man did the same. Their eyes met in a silent exchange, one Karoline couldn't decipher. Then, without another word, they turned and hurried toward the cockpit. Karoline stood there, heart hammering. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but one thing was clear. This flight was no longer just a routine trip home. She started to turn back toward the cabin when the plane lurched violently. Passengers screamed. This wasn't turbulence. This was a gut-wrenching, stomach-dropping plunge that sent drinks flying and people gasping. The overhead bins rattled. A chorus of panicked cries filled the cabin. Karoline grabbed the nearest seat, knuckles white. Her heart slammed against her. Ribs flight attendants scrambled for their jump seats, strapping in. Then, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom. Strained, controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, steady but strained. Karoline had been on enough flights to recognize pilot speak. This wasn't turbulence. Something was wrong. She turned, scanning for the two FAA agents. Where had they gone? The cockpit door was still shut, but behind it, movement. Fast, urgent. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw Monroe. The old veteran hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still in first class, hands resting on the armrests, staring straight ahead as if none of this was happening. Her pulse hammered. Gripping the headrests for balance, she made her way back toward him. A flight attendant called after her. "Miss, please remain seated." She ignored it. She reached Monroe's row, leaned in. "What the hell is happening?" He didn't answer. Right away, just turned his head slowly, his gaze steady. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "It's not turbulence." A chill crawled up her spine. "It's them." Karoline's stomach twisted. "Who?" Monroe exhaled. "The ones who don't want me to land." Her fingers dug into the seat in front of her. "What are you talking about?" Monroe's expression darkened. "Listen to me." His voice dropped lower, more urgent. "There's something in my bag, something they don't want you to see." Karoline blinked. "What?" Monroe reached down, slow, deliberate, and tapped the black carry-on beneath his seat. "You need to take it," he said, "no matter what happens." Every nerve in her body screamed that this was insane. She should go back to her seat. She should let those agents, or whoever they really were, handle it. But the look in Monroe's eyes stopped her. It was the look of a man who knew his time was running out. Karoline hesitated, glancing around. The passengers were tense, some gripping their armrests, others murmuring prayers under their breath. The FAA agents hadn't returned. The cockpit was still locked. Slowly, she reached down and grabbed the bag. It was heavier than she expected. With a quick glance to make sure no one was watching, she unzipped it just enough to see inside, and her blood turned to ice. Tucked beneath a layer of neatly folded clothes was a thick, sealed envelope. Not just any envelope, one marked with the official insignia of the United States government. Her breath caught. This wasn't some old war memento. This was classified, and now she was holding it. She zipped the bag back up, pulse hammering, and looked up at Monroe. "What is this?" she hissed. But before he could answer, the cockpit door burst open. The two FAA agents stormed back into the cabin, moving straight for Monroe. "Sir, you need to come with us." Their voices were sharper now, commanding. This wasn't a request. Passengers turned to watch, murmurs rippling through the cabin. Karoline barely breathed. Monroe didn't resist. He exhaled, slow and measured, then rose to his feet. But just before stepping past her, he leaned in. So close only she could hear. "Don't trust them." Then, he was gone. But just as they reached the cockpit door, the plane lurched. Hard. The impact sent people slamming into seats, trays clattering, gasps filling the air. Then, the lights flickered. A sharp, high-pitched alert rang through the cabin. And then, the oxygen masks dropped. Panic rippled through the plane. Passengers fumbled for the masks, some frozen in shock, others gasping for breath. The low, artificial voice of the automated safety system echoed overhead. "Please place the oxygen mask over your nose and mouth and breathe normally." But nothing about this was normal. Karoline's mind raced. The FAA agents, Monroe, the bag. They had taken him, but they hadn't taken his bag. If they knew he had classified documents, why hadn't they checked it? Why had they taken him but left behind the very thing they were so desperate to contain? Because they didn't think he'd pass it off. Because they hadn't expected her. Then, a sudden, heavy thud. The cockpit door. It had locked behind the agents, and Monroe. Karoline's breath caught. Something was happening in there, something bad. A flight attendant, eyes wide with fear, rushed up the aisle toward the cockpit. "Captain?" she called, but no one answered. She knocked on the cockpit door. "Captain?" Silence. The flight attendants exchanged nervous glances. Then, another jolt. Not turbulence, not weather. Something was wrong with this plane. Across the aisle, a man gripped his armrest, knuckles white. "Are we going down?" His voice was barely a whisper, shaky with fear. Karoline refused to believe it. She turned to the flight attendant. "What's going on? Do you have communication with the cockpit?" The woman's face was pale. She shook her head. "They're not responding." A cold weight settled in Karoline's stomach. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a hijacking. Her first instinct was to stand, to demand answers, to force someone to tell her what the hell was happening. But then, Monroe's last words rang in her head. "Don't trust them. Not just the agents. Anyone." Her gaze flicked to the bag at her feet. If Monroe had risked everything to get this to her, if those men had taken him without checking what he was carrying, then this bag wasn't just important. It was the most important thing on the plane. And if they realized she had it, she was next. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Around her, the cabin buzzed with rising panic, passengers fumbling with their oxygen masks, whispering, crying. She needed time. She needed a plan. Carefully, quietly, she pulled Monroe's bag onto her lap. The zipper was stiff. The fabric, slightly worn, inside, her fingers brushed against the sealed envelope. The one with the government insignia. She hesitated. Opening something like this was dangerous. Beyond dangerous. If she got caught with classified documents, she wouldn't just be dealing with those agents. She'd be dealing with the entire U.S. government. But what if this was bigger than that? What if Monroe had risked everything because whatever was inside couldn't stay hidden anymore? Her fingers moved deeper into the bag and froze. Something metal, small, a flash drive. Her breath hitched. The envelope held secrets on paper. But the drive? The drive was something else entirely. No time to think. She shoved the bag back under her seat, just as the cockpit door unlocked. The first agent stepped out. Alone. Monroe was gone, and his face, normally composed, unreadable, was pale. His eyes locked onto Karoline, and he started walking toward her. She had seconds to decide what to do next, but before he could reach her, the intercom crackled. The captain's voice came through. Only something was wrong. His tone, too slow, too measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." A pause. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be making an unscheduled landing." Another pause. "Remain calm. Further instructions will be provided shortly." The hairs on Karoline's arms stood up. No. Something wasn't right. The cockpit had been locked. The pilot and co-pilot had been silent. And now, suddenly, the captain was back on the intercom, sounding like he was being forced to speak. The pieces snapped together. He wasn't in control. Someone else was. And Monroe? He was gone. Karoline swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay still. "Stay calm." The agent reached her row. He crouched slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the cabin's hum of panic. "I need you to come with me." She met his gaze. "I don't think so." His jaw tightened. But he didn't. "Push instead." His voice dropped further. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." Her pulse spiked. He knew. Monroe's warning echoed in her mind. Don't trust them. She had one option left. Leaning in slightly, she whispered, "If I go with you, the whole plane will know something's wrong." The agent didn't move. She pressed on. "You don't want that. You want quiet. You want control. But if you drag me out of this seat..." She let her words settle. "You lose both." For the first time, Doubt flickered in his eyes. He straightened, glanced around. Passengers were already watching, the flight attendants whispering. The fear in the air was thick, and in that moment, Karoline saw it. He wasn't in charge. Whoever was behind this, whoever had taken Monroe had forced the captain to speak. This agent was just a pawn. So she did something that went against every survival instinct. She relaxed, or at least, she pretended to. She exhaled, nodded slightly. "Don't want trouble," she murmured. "I just want to land safely."